Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. Ed Martin almost unseated Missouri 3rd District Congressman Russ Carnahan in November 2010. If elected, Mr. Martin said he would advocate a leaner and more efficient government. He pledged never to raise taxes. He stated that he was committed to making government work better on its core principles, particularly national defense and public safety. Because the Republicans aimed to retake the House in 2010, the Carnahan-Martin race drew some national comment. In 2011, that 3rd District seat has been eliminated. Missouri lost one seat in Congress as a result of the 2010 census. Instead of a rematch with Carnahan, Ed Martin is now running in the open 2nd District seat. That seat is open because the 2nd District Congressman Akin is running for the U.S. Senate seat currently held by Claire McCaskill. If this sounds like a soap opera to you, think again. There are serious times, and you folks in the 2nd District, you must choose wisely. If you're, well, we're just pleased to have with us today Ed Martin.
Thanks, Lee. Good to be with you.
Thanks for being with us today.
Great being here.
So you came, let's just do a review.
Sure.
Because this show is also shown in Illinois, and most of those people probably don't know about your race.
Yep.
So not that many months ago, in November 2010, you were in a face-off with Russ Carnahan, who is the son of the former governor, Mel Carnahan.
Yep.
And he is still the congressman because you lost by what, 4,400?
4,400 votes, yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it was an exciting, as you know, 2010 was one of those exciting election years. And about a year out from the election, we decided to make an argument that, hey, this is Dick Gephardt's old seat, and this is Russ Carnahan, a big name, but the people deserve a choice. And what started as a real grassroots effort, you know, in a bakery parking lot, built steam, and we ended up with, you know, thousands and thousands of volunteers. We raised $1.6 million from $50 checks and $100 checks and more. And actually, Representative Shimkus over here came over and helped. It really became a test in a district that leaned Democrat by about 58 to 42. Right. What could we do? And we held Carnahan to 48% of the vote.
I was going to say, Mr. Carnahan did not get even 50% of the vote because there were a couple other people in the race, weren't there?
There were third-party candidates, Libertarian Constitution Party and our race. So,
and they added up to about 7,000.
I think it was a little
votes.
bit less, but yes, it was enough to seem to swing the race. But I will say, most people know that third-party candidate, people that vote for third parties don't automatically vote for a Republican or Democrat. So it's hard to, you look back and wonder, as you and I have talked about, there were some irregularities in voting and the polls on that day. So we went back and looked at that. I'm very comfortable with what happened. And more importantly, Carnahan was a real Pelosi sort of rubber stamp. And so we were able to swing the House. And I think we've seen the fruits of that. And divided government in Washington, D.C. is better than what we had before, and it's a start. So.
Okay. Now, you just said something that I wasn't intending to get into, but just briefly. You used to be on an election commission, didn't you, for the city of St. Louis?
Yes, I was chairman of the St. Louis Board of Elections.
Right. And there has been a lot of discussion about whether or not there's, you know, up and up, if the Board of Elections in the city of St. Louis is on the up and up.
Uh-huh.
Do you have an opinion on that?
Oh yeah, look, in 05 I was made chairman, and we fired or retired about 30% of the people that worked there because they just didn't have a real focus on what they did. We cleaned the voter rolls. We actually compared the voter rolls on our side of the river with Illinois and other counties. We knocked off duplicates. I mean, we really did work hard. I am very confident, especially in the city, that the system has integrity. Now, every system is susceptible to fraud and abuse and problems based on the people in that time. And right now, the election board is now governed by Democrats, and there seems to be some more problems. But in general, again, I look closely at it. I know enough about it to see where the problems could be, and I don't feel like that was the case in this election. There's always fraud. When the liberals say there's no voter fraud, it's made up, they're not telling the truth. There's always fraud. The question is it enough to swing our elections? And also, is it too much fraud to take away your confidence in your vote counting? And those are the two problems. I'm pretty confident we're doing okay.
Okay. Now, I noticed when the elections were going on in Iraq for the first time that I saw some of the B-roll, and while these guys are sitting, the people come up to the table, and the guys who are sitting behind the tables, they actually were checking the voters' rolls to see but they also had a picture of the voter.
Right.
So they look at the picture, look at that,
right.
And so I mentioned this to Judge Goki, who is on the St. Louis County election board, and he said, "Oh, well, we can't do that." What is the problem with picture ID?
Well, first of all, photo ID for voting is the most common sense and the surest way to fight voter fraud. It holds people accountable. You need a driver's license or a state-issued photo to get on a plane, to buy pseudoephedrine, all sorts of things.
To get a library book.
Right, to get a library book. But here's the practical thing. What happened in Missouri, people need to understand this, is the Missouri Supreme Court, an activist court, struck down a photo ID law, saying it was an improper burden. In other words, the Missouri Supreme Court read into the Constitution that somehow a photo ID was a burden. This is nonsense, but it was the law. So what's happened in Missouri is we're going to put it on the ballot to get a constitutional amendment for photo ID. But look, across the country, people know there's problems. Illegal immigrants are registering to vote. People are voting in double places twice. The common sense thing to do is demand this accountability. It will come to Missouri. I hope it comes sooner rather than later, but it's coming in Kansas and Georgia and other places, and we need it and we should have it, and the people deserve it, again, for that second reason, confidence that they know their vote's not being offset by fraud or by someone who shouldn't vote.
Okay, let's come back to this congressional race, which is what you're really here to talk about today. Let's assume for a second that it's now January 2013. You have been elected. You're going. You are now the congressman representing the Second District.
Yep.
What are your goals?
Well, I got a couple of broad policy goals. One would be a balanced budget amendment. I think we need to get more people behind a balanced budget amendment in office. That's something I've seen work at the state level. We need it. A second one, broad policy goal, is term limits. I think we need term limits at the federal level. Our founders understood that people were limited by their life and their livelihood at that time in our history. We need term limits. As a practical matter, a little more granular, there are two things. One, we need to focus on how we make government more transparent so we can argue about how wrong it is. In other words, the race to the top, education, quote unquote, reform.
Explain, people may not know what that race to the top is.
Well, the easiest way for me to explain it is it's billions of dollars given to the Secretary of Education to try to force states to comply with their standards and their vision. Okay. But more importantly, it's a pot of money. $8 billion was given to the Secretary of Education.
At the federal level.
At the federal level, that we have not seen. Transparency on how that money's being used and what's happening is a tool for us to win the argument. Same thing with some of the other agencies, Department of Energy. It's existed since 1979 or so, $24 billion, I think, last check in the budget. What do they do? Let's get more transparency on government. The second thing is, I believe that the biggest burden, twin burdens on ourselves and our businesses, are taxes and regulations. Now, it's easy to say cut taxes. Well, we need to cut taxes when we reduce the size of government, but the regulatory burden is what's really stifling businesses. You talk to a small business, a roofer, he tells you OSHA has become a regular visitor. They're not fining him, they're charging him a regular fee, effectively. OSHA, EPA, on and on and on. We need to really try to make those agencies get back within the constraints, and some of them are so far abound from the Constitution, it's actually comical. But we need to start doing that. Light bulbs. They're going to tell us what kind of light bulbs to have, what to do. That cost.
Congress itself goes ahead and starts voting laws in. It was a Republican who actually authored the original bill to take the common light bulb and phase it out.
Well, look, there's plenty of room for both parties to be blamed. I was looking back, 1995. First of all, gas was $1.16 a gallon. Since then, have you seen, do any of us know, a coherent energy policy that actually goes and gets the oil in Anwar and off our shores? This is crazy. But even since 1995, there was about $4 trillion in debt. Since then, we've added almost $10 trillion in debt. Republicans, Democrats alike. This is insane, and we've got to have people that are not of the party, that call themselves conservative and Republican, that are willing to fight whoever it is, Democrats, Republicans, or others, to stop this madness. It's as serious as that.
I don't think that people fully understand just how serious this debt problem is. just here and now, I'm going to do a little rap here. There is a website at the Department of Treasury. They have what's called the Bureau of Public Debt. And in this Bureau of Public Debt, they have a website, and if you go there and you go to one of their subsets, you'll see where every month is listed how much money was spent on interest costs on the debt, right? And so for every month in a fiscal year, and so now we have, I think there's like 6 of them or 7 of them for this particular fiscal year. And then you go down and you look the last 20 years, how much money we've actually spent on this. Okay, now, as soon as interest rates start to rise again, and they will,
right, they
the
have
$450 billion that this year we're going to spend right off the top could go to 500, 600, 700, 800, 900 billion. In other words, most of the money, the tax money that we collect, could go to pay interest costs, and I don't think that people who keep raising the debt understand that that's the outcome.
And interest rates have to go up. I mean, they have to. They can't stay at close to zero forever. This is one of the reasons why the movement that started with Ron Paul, talking about the Fed, has now hit its peak with everybody talking about auditing the Fed. I mean, we have these unelected bureaucrats who are in there holding our interest rates down, doing these quantitative easings. What exactly is happening? Because you're right, if interest rates go to 4%, we're in deep trouble just as to the interest on our debt. And no one is talking about it. Instead, we're quibbling with $38 billion when the building's burning down. It is as serious as that, and we were talking before the show with one of the people working here. It's not just our lives. It's not just our kids' lives. We used to say our kids and grandkids. It's ours. It's the next 10 years and the next 5 years, and we've got to get after it. And that's why I think this 2nd Congressional District, Todd Akin is someone who's known as a conservative, a stalwart. Replacing him needs to be done carefully, thoughtfully. The argument I'm making is we need a real fighter for the future of the nation and also for the metro region, and that's what I think we're going to see in this debate.
So what can we do? Not just, there is this debate within the Republican Party about not spending as much. But that does not, let's bring it back just to MasterCard or Visa. Okay, so you only spend $25 a month, and that's what you're making your payment. But you still have $5,000 that's already billed on there, and they're charging you interest against that. That's the condition that the United States is currently in. What are we going to do about getting at the $5,000 and getting that paid off?
Yeah, well, the first thing we got to do is stop digging the hole we're in. So I agree with you, and I'm not seeing enough will on both parties' part to stop that digging. I think we have to stop the spending, and we have to realize that.
Well, that seems to me because we have a whole class of voters, seniors in particular, who just won't hear of the idea that we can't spend as much on them as a group.
Right.
And that's where, Social Security, Medicare, and other social programs is the majority of where all this money is being spent that we don't have.
Right. But here's what I'd say is we have to be careful about how we function as Americans. When people pay into Medicare or Social Security, we've sort of made a deal with them. Now, we have betrayed them in Social Security by stealing their money and using it for other things.
That's true.
Our Congress has.
Since 65-ish or thereabouts.
So we have to be fair about it. When people have relied on a system and it's been pulled out from under them, we have to be careful. Now, what you're seeing in the last 15 years, by the way, is Social Security and Medicare being abused by the disability system. So people that didn't pay in are getting huge benefits. So when you haven't paid in and you're getting huge benefits, we have to be strong enough to take that on. Here's an example, Medicaid. Nobody I know wants us to have zero safety net. But it's not a safety net now. It's an entitlement program for millions and millions of people. I'm sorry, that may be one of the things we have to cut. For me, the priorities start with veterans. We made a deal. If you put your life on the line, we're going to honor it. Now, we're not doing a good enough job because the system isn't good enough, but I think we have to honor that first. Social Security and Medicare, most people paid in, and we have to be serious about it. Now, I do think we're going to have a discussion about the future of Medicare. I don't expect to get it the same way it is for my parents. Social Security, I don't expect it to be there in the same way. What can we do? The left will go nuts, but we should means test some of these. The reason I like means testing, it reveals that it's really a tax. It's not actually a program, it's a tax. But we should means test some of them. We should go and talk about the future of Medicare in a way that has Medicare Advantage, the actual system where you can control what you get and your health and wellness. But my wife's a physician, works in geriatrics, and she tells me that Medicare and Medicaid are not good enough care and they are way too expensive. So we're not doing anything about reform. But back to your point, we have to have enough courage to take on, the idea of unemployment insurance. all of us think, I think, we should have a safety net. Usually it's our churches and our families, but periodically it'd be the government, but not 99 weeks. It can't be. We can't do it, take your money to pay somebody else. So we're going to have that conversation about cutting back on all these things that people, think are great and are really more of a giveaway than they are a safety net. And I don't think we're having that conversation yet.
Now, I recognize that in your last campaign, you made the promise, nope, not going to vote to raise taxes at all.
Made it again already.
Okay, well, let me just suggest something, or ask something here, more the point. If we were to really say, okay, we're going to take some dedicated money and we're actually going to start buying back these bonds that have been sold, okay, and we're going to clear out this debt. 14 trillion, that's a whole lot of money. But it is possible if we were to say, okay, over 20 years, 30 years, something like that, if we were to set up something like a mortgage, and we start putting money into this, we could actually pay down that debt over a 20 or 30-year process, which, by the way, I bet would stabilize the foreign markets pretty quick if they saw the Americans were trying to do that. Could we possibly have a separate tax that goes straight towards that?
Come on, Lee. I mean,
and that's all.
No,
and that's all the job that it would do.
Because you and I both know Washington, D.C. doesn't have a revenue problem. They get tons of revenue. We can't give them more revenue. We just can't do it. We can't take it from our businesses.
Well, how do we pay down the already? I mean, it's one thing to balance the budget.
Yep.
It's something else to get rid of $14 trillion that's already there on the books.
The way we do it is we tell Washington and send people there that will stop this dissonance they have. If you drive in South County and see Crestwood Mall, you know it's half empty. If you fly into Washington, D.C., you see that the bureaucrats are building buildings as fast as they can fill them with people that work there.
Okay.
We need to dramatically change the understanding of what the federal government is not just about, but what it's doing day to day. So I
agree with you that, like you said earlier, they're off doing stuff that has nothing to do with the Constitution of the United States. They do it because they think it's the right thing to do. In their minds, this is the right thing to do. They're not doing it because it's criminal. They're doing it because they think that they're helping people or doing, even though it's not in the contract.
Right, but there's two problems. One is it's not in the contract. Well, let's set that aside. The second is they're taking money from us to do all this other stuff. Now, at a certain point, taking money from you to give to somebody else is unfair when you are suffering and feeling overburdened. So if you're in Missouri, in the Second District, you're worried about your kids' future and jobs, and out in D.C., they're growing their power and growing their influence. So it's going to be a dramatic thing. I actually think in the next 15 years, we're going to have dramatic moments of real decision, and we better. Otherwise, we're headed to a real disaster.
Well, what you seem to be saying then is that collect the same revenue, but stop spending it over here, take that money that's not being spent over here, and start buying back the debt.
No, I'm saying that we know that most Americans know they are overtaxed, and they also know that the government's overspending. So right now we have a deficit spending. They're spending $3.8 trillion and only bringing in $2.2 trillion approximately.
Something like that.
So that clearly doesn't work for any normal family. But I'm also telling you that most businesses and most families know that the tax rates and the cost of things have gone up, and it's getting harder and harder to make it work. Now, I think we gradually do things like get rid of the corporate income tax. We gradually get the IRS flatter and get it more fair, where right now, if you're really powerful, union or corporation, you get a benefit from the IRS because you can influence legislation. That doesn't seem to me to be working in the long run, too. So we need to get the IRS, shrink that down and get it flatter. But most people know they don't have enough for how hard they're working, and the incentive to keep working hard is being stifled, and that's a real concern for our future growth.
Absolutely. I mean, you've got me sold on that. I'm just trying to find out how we're ever, and it's not really up to you as an individual to, and I don't think people understand that an individual congressman, just like an individual legislator who goes to Jefferson City, they just don't have that much to say about it. Even the president.
No, but I think we've seen with Paul Ryan, there are ways to lead by ideas and thinking. And here's what we know. We've tried for 30 or 40 years to grow the federal government's power and its cost, and to raise the burden of taxes and regulations on families and businesses. I think it's time to say we're going to try the other route. And I think most people get that in their gut. And so I agree with you that there's a certain part of this that is one person out of 435. On the other hand, we need some people that are willing to even say it, because some people right now won't say look, Paul Ryan's budget is not just smart and incredibly courageous. It's a great start. It's the kind of thing we have to do to be bold. And I think we're not having our people be serious enough to step up and do it.
Do you think that the Ryan proposals have any chance at all with regular Republicans?
Look, here's what President Obama and Pelosi and Reid had. 2 years of unfettered control. And they made no attempt to talk about Medicare and Social Security reform.
That's true.
So here comes Paul Ryan. He says, here's a serious adult proposal. It has some real problems, but so does any serious adult proposal. I think he has set the debate, and I think he has set us on a course where we're going to talk about entitlement reform. So if you don't ever lay down your cards, no one can know even where to start negotiating from, and I think that's a strength. Now, I do think there's some problems with it. I think how it came out has been a little difficult, but in general, the guy is a 40-something-year-old serious man who said, we can't do this. My kids won't be able to do it. Meanwhile, Obama and Reid and Pelosi are congratulating themselves on destroying health care with Obamacare. So, I think it's got a chance to make progress. What that progress will be will depend on replacing Obama and replacing the Senate, and then having our side have the courage to really lead instead of getting caught up in the system.
Again, so now you've been elected, it's January. What House committees would you like to serve on if you had the opportunity?
The first one I've asked to do, and I've done this for a long time, is Veterans Affairs. I think that Veterans Affairs is really important, not just for the silly and terrible abuses that we've seen Cochran and Russ Carnahan supervise, that mess, but more importantly, we're bringing men and women home from Iraq and Afghanistan with traumatic head injuries, yes, with more issues. In Vietnam, they came home, we didn't know how to deal with them. We ended up with record homelessness and drug addiction. We've got to do better. And I think that actually is what the federal government should be on the front of. Now, I'm not convinced the VA hospital system is good enough yet, but I know we're trying to honor it. So Veterans Affairs would be one. I think, beyond that, I'm really interested mostly in sort of domestic issues and this regulatory stuff. So I think some of the oversight committee where ICE is looking, Representative ICE is looking at how some of these government agencies work. Lee, I've told you before, when I worked for the state of Missouri, we created a website called www.mapyourtaxes.mo.gov, the Missouri Accountability Portal.
Talk about that.
Yeah, it took every single tax dollar of Missouri government and put it online so you could see who got it on what date and for what. No spin. No trying to tell you it was this outcome. Who got the money on what date for what reason? And it has become one of the models across the world because of this transparency. And people can go in and say, hey, wait, you're spending $500,000 on advertisements in the Post-Dispatch and other papers. Why? And the reason is some real estate laws and all this stuff. And they can hold us accountable. They can say, what are you spending on gas and this? And they can see salaries and travel. That's the kind of thing at the federal government. It's so much bigger. But we've got to demand that kind of transparency. And so that would interest me in terms of trying to make the regulatory system lessened.
Coming back to a smaller level, what do you see different about running in the 2nd, which is mostly St. Louis County, way up, I think even all into St. Charles County now?
It is.
As opposed to where you were running before, which was a far more rural, well, you had urban, and then you had some really rural areas of South St. Louis County and into, what is it, Jefferson?
Jefferson and St. Genevieve County. Well, look, the new 2nd is sort of a combination of the 3rd and the 2nd. And it's got everything from, more rural areas in far West County and up in St. Charles, people living in, less populated areas, down to South County and even some of Jefferson County. What we know is this. The Metro St. Louis area is facing a crisis almost as big as what we're seeing in Washington. We're losing jobs. We weren't once a hub, TWA long gone. We're losing ground. And people are concerned about their own future work. Underemployment is something like 17% in America, people not having enough work. They're worried about their kids. They're worried about why the schools are getting worse and why crime's getting higher. So although the neighborhoods have changed a little bit where we represent, these are the same people that when I worked for the church and was out in churches working with them, or when I worked for the state of Missouri, you're hearing from people these concerns. And so it's a little different, but it's a great district, and it's a really important time for this Metro St. Louis, and that's why I'm so excited about it.
We didn't really start off with your background or your resume. Do you want to just talk a little bit about who you are and what you've done?
Yeah, well, the most important thing is I've got a great wife named Carol, who's a physician who works part-time in geriatrics. And we got 3 great kids, Madeline and Edward and Michael. That's the center of our lives.
These are little ones.
There's little ones, yeah, 7, 4, and 2. They're great, and they're a blessing. And I'm a lawyer. I've worked at big law firms downtown. I've worked at my own firm for a few years. I also worked for the state of Missouri as Chief of Staff to Governor Blunt. I headed the Missouri Club for Growth, which demanded low tax policies from our elected officials if we'd support them. And I've done a lot of pro-life work. I'm proud of one famous case. I sued Governor Blagojevich to try to stop him from forcing pro-life medical professionals from getting involved in abortion and RU-486. And I like seeing him on trial because he was a bully back then, and he's now been shown to be a really corrupt official, and so it was satisfying. But I'm somebody who's motivated, I think, by hope, by wanting to do better for all of us, and a vision, as I said, in term limits, that nobody can serve for very long without it being awfully difficult and intoxicating. I think people need to get in and get out. The best elected officials are those that are public servants for a period and then go back into private life, and that's what I intend to do.
We got about 2-3 minutes left here. You spent some time in Indonesia also, didn't you?
I did. I after college, I did a research fellowship for a year in North Sumatra, not far from where that tsunami hit a few years ago. So, and I was in many of the places that the president lived when he was young. So, yeah, it's a fascinating country. The time I was there, the Islam that was present there had not yet really been so militant. It has really gotten to be a much more difficult place. When I was there, as a country, it was still growing, and it was more focused on trying to get stable as a moderate democracy.
And then you also you worked for the Catholic Church too.
I did. Well, after that I spent 2 years in Italy, and I was a Rotary International Scholarship recipient. It was a great blessing. I studied there, studied philosophy and languages, and later worked for the Catholic Church in St. Louis for about 3 years, helping families with education reform and pro-life issues, and doing education and advocacy. So during that period, I actually did work for 1 month for John Paul II. I went to the Vatican and worked for the Pope. It was a great privilege, and was sort of an assistant to him, and he was an amazing man. So I have had a bit of a varied career, and I enjoy that work when we're focusing on how families and faith communities can do better. And government is more than ever trying to do so much that I feel like our faith communities are suffering. So it's important work.
And lastly, in the last minute or so that we have here, 30 seconds, is there anything that you wanted to add?
Well, I think that the best thing about the Tea Party and the efforts like it, and I've been involved, and you and I have seen each other at events, is that people are energized to get involved, to ask candidates questions. There will be a primary in this race, and that's good. Because when people decide behind closed doors, the party people, who's going to win, we don't get to hold them accountable. So take this opportunity to hold your elected officials accountable, ask them questions, and get them on the record. And then when they are in office, hold their feet to the fire, because that is what's great about these last couple of years. I feel really excited about that. And if you're interested, please go to our website and get in touch with us to help with our campaign.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate your coming and bringing yourself here. I know your time is very valuable.
Good to be here. And
to my audience, I've been speaking with Ed Martin. He's a candidate for the U.S. Congress in the Missouri 2nd, which is a newly formed district. Those of you who live in the 2nd, really take a close look at your candidates. It's important that you get it right. And to the rest of you, well, we'll see you next week. Thank you.